Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Guilhem George. I'm the VP Sustainability of Contentsquare, which is a French tech company specialized in analytics to improve user experience on the web. And I'm really happy to welcome two really high-level speakers. So you already know Lubomila Jordanova from Planet Earth. And I welcome Ragne Maasel from LVH Bank, one of the major banks in Estonia, you can say. Yes. So we're going to have a discussion about ESG and climate measurements. So I will just introduce this session by sharing some digits. Just according to a study published by Bloomberg in last February, global ESG assets are on track to exceed 53 trillion by 2025, which is almost a third of all assets under management. So this is a big shift, and it's happening quite fast. So Ragne, maybe first question for you. Could you just tell us what is ESG?
Well, I see the time ticking, so it's probably going to take me more than 27 minutes. But basically, ESG is how you manage and also measure the environmental, social, and governance aspects of your company. So it's very, very similar to sustainability or corporate sustainability. But in my mind, the difference really is that ESG is something that you can put numbers to and that you can measure and in the end actually manage. And yeah.
And well, why is it important from an investor, from a client, and also from a value chain point of view?
Well, maybe I would just say from an organizational point of view, to start with, it's a really big change management project, and everyone likes to talk about sustainability and talk about the sustainability mindset, but how do you quantify it, and how do you manage it, and how do you benchmark it, I think is the challenge. And from the viewpoint of, I don't know, customers, investors, banks, we know how to evaluate companies based on their financial performance, but how do we evaluate them according to their impact or how sustainability is managed within their organization? So that is the real challenge. And I think within organizations, how do you build structures? How do you build an organization that only doesn't talk about sustainability, but can also integrate it into their business and actually manage it?
Well, Lubomila, I also like to have your point of view on this. But could we say, is it not a nice to have anymore, ESG today?
Absolutely. So there's three particular factors that have been influencing businesses to think about this topic. First of all is regulatory pressure. There's just so many new legislations that just came out, and definitely the European Union and the UK are leading the way globally for making corporate life complex when it comes to report preparation. I know you're familiar with this. The second one is related to investors. I gave a bit of an overview in my keynote about this, but there's a lot of money to be lost, and I think finally the word is out, and there's a lot of knowledge about this, and understanding that it is not going to be a cheap exercise to transition the whole economy. And then the final bit is the consumers. It is a dominant decision-making factor in many people's minds, and you can see it definitely in the Western countries as a leading decision-making kind of criteria for those that have certain, of course, like profile of a client, but it is moving the needle. So that's kind of maybe the three key pillars.
Okay, so we can say that it's becoming more a must-have. Is it also the case for startups and scale-ups whose concerns is more about survival in the really early stages?
So if you think about the money flow structure, when you look into a limited partner, then it going into a VC, then going into the startups, like you see how this impact and request for more transparency on ESG trickles down to the scale-ups. The faster the company is growing, the more money it has under management, the more risk is associated to them if they're acting irresponsibly. So I think startups have to be thinking about this from the perspective of like first of all, how do I define my company in these early days with the proper values embedded into anything that we built? And then as a second layer, if you're kind of a bit further down the journey, how do I rehaul what we've been doing so that we start aligning to everything that is now applicable to us, that is the LPs wanting more numbers from our investors, the employees asking questions, and obviously us wanting to be at the forefront of this topic.
Ragne, do you agree with this? For you as an investor point of view?
Well, investors are starting to look into ESG even more and more, but maybe from an organizational viewpoint, I think it's much easier to turn around a smaller ship than it is with a big one. And I think when you're a startup and you're just starting out, I think it's much easier and actually probably more effective if you start kind of integrating this mindset and the different kind of processes and understanding the legislative environment. I think it makes so much more sense to do it at the beginning. And a lot of companies, especially now when we look at the EU taxonomy and all the kind of the legislative pressures that we have, why companies struggle today, large companies, is because it hits bigger companies first, it hits the financial sector first, all this legislative pressure, and why it's difficult is because business as usual is really difficult to turn around. And I think if you're a startup or a small company, it just makes a lot of sense. And of course, from the other side, it is also a risk management issue, ESG and corporate sustainability. It is the double materiality, right? Your risks towards the environmental and the societal environment, and then managing your risks outside in. From the risk management perspective, from getting talent, also communicating your values, getting funded, in the end being more profitable, it makes sense to start when you're just starting out.
Well, maybe a short point about the ESG reporting frameworks. When we prepared this session, you both said that this doesn't matter. For you, what's important is just to take some figures and digits to just understand what are you doing and how to put this in perspective. So, well, what's your point of view about this?
Well, that's the egg and the chicken of ESG. Like, even if we look at the regulatory pressures today coming from the European Commission, they're all basically about reporting. Like, you need to report on your impact, you need to report on your internal processes, how many green assets you have in your portfolio. Everyone talks about reporting, and of course, if you report on some kind of a global, I don't know, GRI or some kind of a well-known format, it's better for you and it's better for the investors or whoever is reading that. But I think too much focus is put on the reporting, and people don't know, it's the wrong end of the pipe that we're starting from. No one knows the formats that you have to. Where do you get the data? We don't have the data. Even if you have the data about your own organization, you don't have it about your clients. You don't have the data from your supply chain. Reporting is important, and it's important that you get into the habit of not only financial reporting, but also non-financial reporting, ESG reporting. But it can't be only for the sake of it. So what comes before reporting is managing your impact, measuring your impact, setting the KPIs, setting the procedures, setting the structures, building internal capacity, building your strategy, integrating ESG. No one's going to tell you how to do it, so you just have to invent the wheel very often.
Well, now, Lubomila, if we come more to climate and carbon measurements, which is your specialty. More and more companies are coming to carbon assessment because they're feeling concerned, also because the regulation is moving. Just to give you two examples, in March, the American SEC proposed a new rule that would require corporations to include certain climate-related disclosures in their registration statements and periodic reports. So it's a big change for the US. And just to give you a French example from where I come from, one of the counterparts for having benefited from state-guaranteed loans under the COVID recovery plan is to realize a carbon footprint assessment, quite a simple one. But this obligation also applies to medium and small-sized companies, as we have some restaurants, groceries, who have to make those new carbon assessments. So, well, what can you bring to those also small and medium companies with your solutions?
Taking a step back, maybe I can just explain what's the fundamental problem with our economy at the moment. I think we have been building a lot of different KPIs for success, and it has always been about financial returns. We're now, with all of this reporting, with all of these new KPIs that are being gathered, trying to overcompensate for the fact that there is no clear view on the actual cost of us doing our business. And it looks as if like you have a, I don't know, I'm thinking just like a ripped jeans and you put some nylon and plastic on it and, you know, just nothing that is going to consistently look good, but nothing that really is going to move the needle, just solves the problem for a short amount of time. Of course, this is a longer conversation that, you know, we're not going to reestablish the world order overnight with that. So I think ESG is just the way we can set these measurements forward. And this is the state of the art at the moment. So there's not, unfortunately, kind of a way to push this faster. And even though in some people's mind, maybe it feels already overwhelming. How we tackle this for companies is that we want to give them a view not only on the carbon, but also on water, waste, like even adding biodiversity KPIs so that they start assessing their potential for impact, the negative, and how this can be turned into a positive one. The product itself works not only as an assessment tool, but also immediate assessment of the opportunity related to decarbonization, ESG improvement, and ultimately it builds you a whole system that has all the building blocks for you to become this sustainability pioneer that you would want to be. For SMEs in particular, the challenge is that the excuse always is going to be we don't have resources. A tool like ours helps to kick off the process, but honestly, after having worked with like a few thousand companies, we can comfortably say that if this is not a top priority topic of management or any kind of decision maker within the company, nothing moves, because no initiative beyond the office cleanup or cleanup around the office is actually working. So that's kind of how we think about it.
So measurement doesn't lead every time to concrete actions. From your experience, to what extent just measure comes to after concrete action?
There was a beautiful Harvard Review study that came out a few months ago that was showing how there's been like 5-fold increase in regulatory frameworks for reporting, and at the same time emissions have never been more off the roof than they are now. So like they're positively even correlated in a way, which hopefully not, but I think it's just this process of recalibration. What is this to say is that exactly fully aligned with what you're saying, like we don't need more reports, like we need alignment between the existing reporting standards, and we can focus on 5 KPIs, not 500. Like if we have 5 KPIs and every single company reports on them, we're gonna, I think, achieve a lot more than getting and overcomplicating the lives of many businesses. I mean, I say this from the perspective that I benefit from that, yeah, we're hoping to get ourselves out of business for less reporting standards.
Well, maybe for both of you, do you think this generalization of carbon assessment could be like a decisive step to change economic fundamentals?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, I think it's a necessary step. The only issue is that we have at the moment, and there's like a few different flanks that are battling. There's a discussion about degrowth. Can we be talking about growth whatsoever? Because obviously this is the idea of GDP kind of going through periods of increase to allow for more prosperity to be, and there's always the explanation like, look what happened in China. They've been able to alleviate people, 200 million people out of poverty thanks to this like gold rush that has happened. There's another perspective that is related to like rebuilding the KPI GDP. I'm kind of more on that side because I think that we don't need to have a black and white kind of perspective. So, no.
Yeah, the problem that I have with measuring your carbon footprint and offsetting, and is also that it's only carbon. Like your slides when you finished the presentation. How do we measure our businesses' impact on biodiversity or the health of soils or forest or oceans? So I think we need to start finding methods and KPIs for measuring your impact on other than carbon. But carbon is kind of like the popular kid in school right now because we know how to measure it. And one maybe issue, the other issue that I have with carbon is those carbon neutrality promises that we see a lot of companies give. Everyone's going to be carbon neutral by 2050. We're going to halve emissions by 2030. But what I'm not seeing is like, okay, 2030 is 8 years away. How are you actually going to achieve it? So everyone's like measuring themselves right now, the companies who are doing a good job. But how are you actually going to decrease your footprint? Is it just going to be offsetting methods? Are you organically somehow going to shift your business? When are we starting the conversation about that? Mm-hmm. So that is maybe my issue. Maybe we're putting too much emphasis on even like measuring. Where is the actual action on how we're going to decrease our footprint? So I think that's going to probably be the next couple of years worth of discussions ahead of us.
So it's also about transparency and, in a way, some greenwashing. So in terms of greenwashing, we know that sustainability has become just a very powerful argument to sell. And more advertisements, for instance, claim that the products or services are environmentally friendly or carbon neutral. And what you said about companies claiming that they will become carbon neutral by 2050 without no idea of what they're going to make it. Maybe more for Lubomila, do you think the climate transparency that your solution, Plan A, makes available to any kind of businesses could help to fight against this greenwashing?
I'm looking forward to the moment when someone announces that they're carbon positive this year. I think it's just one of those announcements that, can probably be a bit more realistic than anything related to carbon neutrality. I fully agree with what you said. I find it to be such a difficult narrative to continuously be pushed, and it gets in the minds of people. People actually think that there's something good happening, and it's really scary to know that we're kind of postponing the inevitable, or at least like someone thinks that they are, because it's in the making. Why we built what we built is because of a fundamental understanding that there's humanity at stake, and also there's a lot of inefficiency in the way we look into KPIs, also in the way that we look into just building businesses. The way we distribute resources is just allocated to not always the appropriate things. We as a company have chosen the stance, for example, to not offer carbon neutrality to any of our clients. We have a label that is dedicated to being on the path to net zero, and that's something that is valid for the time that we have availability of the data and transparency on obviously what the company does. The way we tackle the whole greenwashing issue is that, first of all, we've said no to certain industries. When a coal mining company comes to us and says, do you want to work with it? We literally had a case when they offered 1 million for nothing. They said, like, we don't even want to use your tool. We just want to be able to create a campaign. We're like, what? No. So, like, one is, like, the selection of the industries that we work with. I'm not saying that a fossil fuel company cannot transform. Until now, we have not found any that we would work with, but there's definitely kind of ways in which you can tackle this, looking at the industry, looking into kind of what you allow to be claimed based on the usage of your product, and obviously diving deep into data. We don't use any conversion factors, for example, that from Europe or the world, like we use on even sometimes city level for places where we've been able to find such data.
Okay, maybe this one more for Ragne. This is the good transition, I think, with what Lubomila just said. We know that among the world's major banks, including European banks, they present themselves as very green. Some are still massively financing large fossil fuel projects. And, well, or you can just assess what kind of project you want to finance, and do you think that new instruments like the EU taxonomy could help to better analyze those?
Yeah, and I think the greenwashing topic goes really well with this you kind of shifting investments. What the EU taxonomy mainly is that it's a classification system of economic activities and by which criteria it can be considered green and when is it not green. And it should actually be a tool within the European economy to kind of fight greenwashing as well, because in the future it will start from financial products, that very soon you can't even call a financial product green if it's not taxonomy aligned, and I think it will slowly and surely move into maybe even consumer products. So what is green will be defined centrally by the EU, and that's, I think, a very new concept that every company should really look into, that what is green and what is not will get a real definition, very bluntly. But when we talk about banks and investors, it's all about actually like process, and even the title of this panel is a journey. It's about phasing out. It's about phasing out from fossil fuels. It's phasing out from destructive sectors, and I think it's more important for banks and investors to demonstrate how do they actually phase out and how do they find new possibilities, and not to draw red lines, because drawing red lines is easy. It's easy to build exclusion lists and inclusion lists and say we're going to do this and we're going to do that. First of all, it's going to put a lot of pressure on your business. It's going to put a lot of pressures on your investors, and they're going to go, I don't like ESG, I don't like sustainability because it's too strict. But how do you phase out your business from the sectors that are a bit iffy, and how do you phase into the greener business? And that's more work. And I think when I see companies doing very strict exclusion lists, banks doing really strict lists, that makes me think, okay, are you really into sustainability or are you into greenwashing and brand? Of course, there are several sectors where excluding makes the most sense, but phasing out and actually explaining how do you phase out and how does this phasing out strategy fit the Paris Agreement and how does it fit your net zero promise, that's tricky and that's a lot of work, and that needs a lot of understanding from the board and the management, and getting to that point is why ESG is difficult.
So for you, the fact that, for instance, gas power plants remain in the green part of the EU taxonomy is correct, related to the phasing out angle?
Well, the taxonomy cannot be your only tool to making a decision whether or not to finance or give a loan. But what a lot of banks are doing, and definitely investors as well, is that you need to start building, where we're a really young bank, generally a young bank, and we've been dealing with the ESG for only about 3 years now. The taxonomy is a big help on how to define which sector is green and which is not. But when we build our internal ESG indexes and ratings, then we have to take the risk into account as well, the double materiality, right? Our risk to the society and to the environment, and how the environment and the society is actually maybe financially risky for us when we talk about a certain project or an investment decision. So the EU taxonomy, your own risk assessment, your own values, your own processes, your own data analysis structures, they all have to come together for the decision to be made. So we can't just say yes and no. We somehow have to come to a point where we can quantify the ESG risks, our own values, and the EU taxonomy into one decision. So that is tricky.
Lubomila, do you think this EU taxonomy is enough, the categorization between different green and non-green activities, from your carbon expert point of view?
I mean, it's the most elaborate work that has been done in terms of kind of putting into numbers climate adaptation, biodiversity associated to business activities. The challenge that is there is that quite often businesses do not have neither the knowledge nor the skills within the company on how they can tackle the preparation of such a report. We see it with a lot of clients, because EU taxonomy, maybe for those of you that don't know, framework that the European Union kind of kicked off, and rightfully so. You mentioned the controversy with gas being involved in the KPIs. What we see with companies is that it sometimes perpetuates the issue. It kind of extends the incapacity of the company to act because you're preparing a report. And this report is with 500 KPIs. And if you are of a particular size, it goes even more elaborate. So great piece of work in terms of the KPIs that they've identified. How much this is connected to the reality of a company like yours or any other that would need to go through the process, maybe still some work to be done, because it is ultimately a massive challenge when it comes to the preparation of it.
But I completely agree what you're saying, but also I think an issue with the taxonomy is that there's a lot of lobbying going around the taxonomy, and that's what makes me really careful when talking about it or using it. When you use it as an actual tool within your company and you know that there's so much politics involved, that should make everyone a bit careful. But I completely agree, it's a very comprehensive piece of work, and I think it's the best thing we have. It has its pluses, it has its minuses, but that's all we got.
One maybe just comment to make, because I feel like sometimes putting myself in the shoes of someone that is in the audience that has no clue about sustainability and they're just kicking off this whole process. The most important bit in taking any step related to sustainability is first to realize that your company has impact. And the starting point usually is that it has negative impact. These are the policies related to how your employees travel. This is the fact that you have plastic straws available in the office. It's also to the big thing of where you put your money as an investor and so on. But instead of overwhelming yourself about kind of the diversity, the complexity of the issue, and all the frameworks and all the KPIs that need to be gathered, the first step is literally understanding this concept, the idea that there's a negative impact, and then starting to add building blocks related to my carbon footprint, my impact on, waste, water, my employees that maybe have anxiety and are not productive because they're really stressed out about climate. All of these things matter, and there's no right way to do it. It's just not an overnight process, as also you were saying.
Well, as we have just 2 minutes left, I would like to end this session with maybe a more geopolitical or philosophical conclusion. Do you think there is a risk in the next, let's say, 20 years that we will have in a certain part of the world, mainly Europe and the US, a green economy still growing up and spreading, and in the rest of the world remaining a brown or gray economy which will still do the same thing and still use fossil fuels and so on?
There's two scenarios. I think from all the learning that we've gathered over the last few years, there is a lot of sense of urgency. But what we were talking about, in terms of scope 3, impact on others and so on, I don't think it's fully understood by many yet. And in order for all of these changes on a company level to be implemented, that would be the crucial element. And at the moment, if I look at some of our biggest clients, they don't even have access to some of the data from their suppliers in China. So I unfortunately have at the moment the feeling that we're more likely to see a big division in the world, where some are really well prepared and the infrastructure is good and the planet continues to get worse and worse in terms of health, while we essentially have this climate divide, which is the equivalent of financial inequality.
Thank you. Ragne?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's being used as an excuse very often that why should we start even spending money on sustainability if China does this and India does this and Brazil does that and the state do that. So what else can we do? We can just start, and I know we have no time left, but I always say that when you're a CEO of a coal mine, it doesn't matter if you ride your bike to work, if you are a vegetarian, if you buy secondhand clothes, you're still a CEO of the coal mine. And I think to everyone maybe sitting in the audience as well, that decisions that you make in your workplace, and especially when you're an investor or when you're a CEO, but you're in management, the biggest impact that you can make today actually is through business and through your business decision. It is important on a personal level to make a change, but to kind of make the connection on a more global level and and on the level of your own decisions within your own company is, I think we have to kind of shift the mindsets a little bit, that businesses have major impact, but there are people behind the decisions that steer companies, and maybe that's where we should really start.
Well, thank you. We continue this conversation for hours, but it's over. So thank you so much. I think you can give a big clap to our two speakers. That was really interesting.
Welcome back, everybody, to our second half of the first day. If you're feeling good, give me 1 thumbs up. If you've had some food, give me 2 thumbs up. Some of you have food. What happened to the rest of you? To see the food trucks out there? I got ice cream. Priorities are right. Start with ice cream. I'll get my main course after that. You already know the one gentleman who's going to be here. He was moderating the last panel. I want to bring him up for a second just so we can have a quick chat. So first, I'm going to ask you to clap 2 times. The first applause can you give for the wonderful Guilhem as he comes on stage? Come on up, my man. So for those who do not know you, you have been very involved in advising French government. You've been on the cabinet of the French Ministry of Ecological Transition, the cabinet of French Ministry of Environment, Energy and Sea. When you're not advising governments, I believe you have a farm in southwest France, which is everybody's dream that you renovate. But let me ask you this before we start this. If I were to ask you 3 principles that you live by, 3 values that you believe in your core, what would those be?
First will be, of course, ecology.
Ecology.
Second would probably be culture, because it's all about a culture change and fight to change our way of life.
Yes.
And third would probably be solidarity, because without solidarity, any change is not possible. So.
Very good.
3 values.
Those are your 3 values. Here, of course, we're talking about purpose and inclusion. I'd be very curious as I go around to hear from you guys, what brought you here? Why are you here? What are you hoping to learn and engage with? This particular conversation is going to be about public service digitalization. I think everybody knows all over the world that Estonia is leading when it comes to the intersection of government, tech, and all of that. So we have an amazing guest. I'm going to leave you the honors to introduce our guest on the stage. So the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. So I would like you to warmly welcome Ms. Kersti Kaljulaid, former president of Estonia. Thank you to make it in French.
I hope it works. Bonjour, bonjour. Personne m'a pas dire qu'il faut parler en français avec toi.
You speak perfectly French. It's incredible. So, Ms. Kaljulaid, you've been president of Estonia from 2016 to 2021. And in the course of your career, you've held various positions of responsibility in the telecom industry and also in the energy industry. You said me that you were leading a power plant in Estonia. So that makes you a particularly relevant speaker for our talk today.
Thank you indeed, and I think we can discuss how technology can even further promote actually our green turn as well, because Estonians, you know, are not at all afraid when it comes to digital and this kind of stuff, but for some reason really, really scared when we say, let's go green.
Absolutely. So, we just reminded that Estonia is known for having led a very ambitious process of digitalization of its public services and different public policies. This country of 1.3 million inhabitants has become a major source of inspiration for many states around the world. So could you just explain how this dynamic is associated today with sustainable development objectives, and particularly in terms of environment and climate?
This is longer discussion. I think we should sit down for that. You know, Estonia regained its independence 30 years ago, and one of the work streams which started the change was fight against mines. Because, Soviets at that time, Russians today, they wanted to start new phosphorite mining in Estonia. And young children, school children, students rose up. We were not going to accept that our country will be environmentally ruined. And luckily, the tide turned. We regained our independence. And we realized that Estonia is not as industrialized as, for example, France or Germany are. But we also realized there is an opportunity of never getting that industrialized, or at least not to industrialize with the industries which had caused quite a lot of pollution, for example, to Central European rivers. I mean, on our rivers, there has never been a period that a duck lands and falls dead because it landed in the river. There was, before the European Union cleaned up the Central European rivers in your countries. So we didn't want to go down that road. And therefore, we decided we do things differently. We do different things, simply. Of course, we have our fair share of classic industry. But this is always, they try to work on best available technology because Estonia is so nice and green and we don't want to ruin it. It's a country which is as big as Netherlands but has 1.3 million people, and we want to offer everybody in Europe the opportunity to come work here, live here and enjoy this greenery at least for a few years, because this has a 21st century value in itself. But then, of course, there is the question, if you do not do that much industry, what do you do then? Mm-hmm. Well, the answer, of course, is that in Estonia, ICT and agriculture provide equally to the GDP by today.
Interesting, thank you. If we assume that this strong public digital strategy leads Estonia to stay in close contact with the tech companies of tomorrow, startups and scale-ups, to build the right way, what is done to organize this ecosystem and to make sure that those tech players could meet their needs in terms of growth, economic and environmental and social, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs?
Well, first, I understand why you ask how is Estonian public strategy influencing what our businesses do, because you're French. Mm-hmm. Thing is, here we do not influence what our businesses do. Estonia is a free market economy. And Estonian politicians have never believed that they run the world. Even they don't believe that they run Estonian economy. And you know why? Because if you start running economy, then you limit yourself to choosing, where to go, what to promote. And this is a huge risk. Because, frankly speaking, when a crisis hits, something fits, something doesn't. Something is sustainable, something isn't. And if now government has chosen, let's say, 3-4 priorities, and let's say 2 of them fall to this crisis, you're not resilient, you're not sustainable. Therefore, in Estonia, governments promote level playing field for all ideas, for all technologies, for all companies. And this is what the Estonian government has been doing for 30 years. It has been promoting level playing field. At the same time, setting clear objectives, for example, on how we pay taxes. And which is very important is that government helps companies to invest, never mind where they're investing. And you know how this works? Mm-hmm. Estonian corporate income tax only applies to dividends, which means that when a company is investing, be it in digital technologies, green technologies, wherever, government actually takes a risk together with company. Because if you would tax retained earnings, you would take 20% away, a company is left with 80% to invest. But we don't. So effectively, government is in with every investment with 20%, because only if this investment is not lost, and there will be future profits, and there will be dividends, only then will government earn revenue. And this is how Estonia works together with its business and with its people. Also making sure that we contribute to education. We spend 7% of our GDP on education. It's a huge amount, but look at the PISA results. There we are. This is how we run economy here in this country. Hands off, supplier, provider, supporter, but not somebody who tells where to go. Non son pas le dirigiste ici.
So, was a very successful strategy for the Estonian economy.
Yes, and your president, by the way, is trying to do a little bit same with the French economy nowadays.
Yeah, that's true, actually. But we probably have a different way of seeing how states have to intervene in the economy.
True, but if you look where we have got with it, when we regained independence, then our salaries were on average $30–35 per month, maybe. Statistics was bad, but I think it was around that amount. Now it is about 1,400, goes to 1,500 in 30 years.
In 30 years, that's just incredible.
Yes, so I think we have proven our point, because many people told us that you're not going to get anywhere with this strategy. But we did. And you know why we chose different way to many major European countries? Because they came to us and said, if you do exactly like we did, you will catch up. And we were like, how on earth can you catch up if you are copying somebody tens of years later? So we said, we're not going to do it.
True. Well, do you think that tech solutions have the ability to solve major problems we're facing in the sustainability area, to make it short? And for you, is it more about replacing carbon-intensive technology or industries, or inventing new, sober and attractive ways of living?
I don't think we should choose. I mean, there is no universal solution. You have to do both. Basically, you have to make sure that you don't waste resources, and there are great examples. For example, ride sharing. For example, using scooters, using bikes, not owning them, but using them. I think Bolt is a great example how they have brought to us this kind of mobility, which doesn't mean that we need to own everything. As a result, I noticed there are more and more young people in Estonia who do not even have a driver's license, which means that they can handle this without owning the big and wasteful material themselves, which I think is very useful, and thank you to all who are of this group of Estonians. So this is one side. The other side, obviously, is that you need also, I mean, we need to heat our houses here, like in France, you need to cool your houses, I mean, during the summer.
At the moment, yes.
We need to heat our houses, so we cannot actually, go all energy use. At the same time, we've been, albeit I would say too slowly, we have been also making sure that our houses are not wasteful of energy. There are programs, but I should say they should be bigger, and they will probably be also upscaled as we are going through the green turn, but maybe more urgently trying to figure out how we could use less energy at all, because in the next winter we expect we do not want Russian gas and energy, and therefore there might be shortages of supply. So trying to be as ready as possible, and also, I mean, probably thereafter we will remain on this track that we renovate our blocks of apartments quicker than we've been doing so far. Our apartment blocks are our people's dear homes. They own these apartments, it's their assets, and they're very interested in making sure that they are actually kept in good order. Here we differ, for example, of Germany, and I believe also in France. These apartment blocks normally do not belong to apartment after apartment to people themselves. But here this consists of main asset of everybody, so we're very interested in making sure that it's also a good energy class. And then, of course, comes the real green. So far, Estonia has been a little bit slowly to invest into big green electricity production capabilities. We have become more and more climate neutral, but I would call it passive neutrality, which means that we have been more dependent on imported electricity, which has caused some fear, because previously we didn't import electricity, we were self-sustainable in that. So we have to actually pick up and work quicker on big wind parks on the sea and also on shore. Right now, for example, Finland is installing each and every year 1,000 megawatts of wind onshore up north. And I mean, we cannot rely only on what others do. We need to move ourselves quicker. But of course, there are other environmental concerns related to them. So European Union is now thinking on how to alleviate this kind of environmental concerns and fasten up the process. We also need to do it. But you know, there is a big problem with all these kind of big green energy projects. European energy sector is in itself a huge market distortion, because going green is a market distortion. But it's not stable. Like one day we all knew gas is not green. Then comes together European Commission and says gas will be green. But not for everybody. It will be green only for those who can close down a coal plant, which means in Estonia there is exactly one company, Esg, which can use gas as green fuel. Nobody else can. I mean, this is a market distortion on top of the market distortion. And this means that we need to figure out kind of a tripartite agreement with companies, private finance, and then the government guarantees. Because if guarantees, I mean, why guarantees are needed? Because only governments control that they do not change at least their market distortions if they once have installed a market distortion. Otherwise, this would not happen. And actually, we here in North, we dreamed we could do it against the market. But since Germany and France are both investing against votes, not against market, we have to go along now.
Well, staying on the energy topic, in France, we were facing on the last years big problems of acceptability, accelerating installation of onshore wind power farms. Are you facing the same kind of problems in Estonia?
Yes, we are, but I hope we can resolve it similarly like Germans have resolved them, because Germans have always made sure that local communities profit from the windmills. And if you fly over and land in Frankfurt, the picture is different than if you fly over and land in Tallinn or in Charles de Gaulle. That's the situation, and we need to change it.
That's true.
But not over the heads of the local peoples, with them and making them benefit. We have a couple of good examples here in Estonia. One is Virtsu, which is better known, where people say yes, but there are windmills, but we do get actually support from the revenues earned.
Okay, so I understand that Estonia will accelerate its green energy transition to be less dependent of Russian gas in the coming years, probably.
No. Russian gas is a thing which actually is not very common here. People think we must be terribly dependent, but we aren't. And you know why? Because Gazprom was already 30 years ago so stupid that they priced themselves mostly out of Estonian market. In Estonia, the wood cogeneration to heat up our homes has been beneficial. We've been building these plants for 20 years. Because while, I mean, Germans and everybody else were enjoying cheap gas prices, we weren't, which of course made green investment more sustainable already earlier. So gas is actually, well, not so big part of our energy mix. It has even been growing since Lithuania brought in the LNG terminal, which brought the gas prices down, not to German level, but at least below LNG terminal levels, so that we would still use Russian gas. This is how Gazprom works. Sorry you didn't see it before. Now you are finally recognizing what's going on, but we've seen it for 30 years actually. I mean, this is predatory suppliers, so we've always been very careful not to be too dependent. But the little one which we are dependent from, actually, we hope to replace with LNG terminal, which will hopefully start working from Paldiski this autumn.
Okay, so I understand that Estonia has already really dynamic tech ecosystem and will get in the coming years perfect offer of green power, will get kind of a paradise for tech companies.
There is right now, there is Greenergy, which is one kind of development here, which is also a Free Seas project, which is totally green solar park in Estonia. So there are a few first butterflies, but frankly speaking, this is still our dream. We have to, of course, together with all Europe, be totally neutral by 2050, and frankly speaking, I don't see us achieving this quicker. Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working more and more energy efficiency, because there actually we could have the lowest hanging fruits. Big windmills, big parks will come, and if they don't come, then we will be buying it from other countries. But I really don't enjoy the idea of Estonia being passively climate neutral. So all of those who are so against about green energy installments, think about it. Do you really want to be always dependent, therefore, thereafter, of the other producers? Because also, I mean, there is not endless time. Also this green energy production market will be saturated, and if we do not build, somebody else builds, and then again we cannot capture the market share thereafter. So we should actually be working on these projects far quicker, no kidding.
Well, if I may, I would like to move to another topic, which is greenwashing. We know that greenwashing is taking place with a large organization and governments now. How can we avoid going down this slippery slope? Just to give some example to the audience on what we've done in France. For instance, we've put in place a significant framework for advertising, particularly for vehicles. So now you have to get on every advertisement a big logo claiming what are the emissions of the vehicle. And we also put in place a transparency framework for all companies that claim their product or service is carbon neutral. You know that carbon neutrality is becoming the new standard, but it's really often greenwashed or not really assessed with a scientific basis. So, well, what can we do to avoid more and more greenwashing? And do you think that Estonia, or maybe at EU level, there should be a legislation to impose some new rules on this kind of practice?
Absolutely, and there is the big difference between France and Estonia is that we are never going to develop our own standards on how to measure, for example, CO2 emissions in production. It's pointless. We are a small market, and we are actually part of the European Union market. So if you have a good standards already there, I guess there would be nothing. I mean, in our case, against taking them over as EU standards, we do not plan to go as our own standards. But what is even more important is that we do not have EU standards, but we have at least that the West, the common West, the free world, applies together also these kind of standards, in addition to doing trusted connectivity standards, which we know that we can believe in, and which are not necessarily the same as the autocratic regimes of this world use. So I think we should go this way. Otherwise, again, if everybody has their own system of measurement, reporting, and so on, this will be, I mean, market distortions, which we do not want. This is a big problem, which I think OECD actually has to look at. How, while we know that, I mean, all these green elements, green measures, CO2 neutral production reporting, and all these things, that they are very necessary. But if they are different for each and every market, let's say EU market, Northern American, Australian markets, they result in breaking the global trade. Some of the global trade might be worth breaking because your CO2 emissions analysis will show that, I mean, transporting stuff from afar is not necessary and meaningful anymore, but some of it we would want to keep. And to make sure that we do not unnecessarily fracture the markets, I think we need to make sure that the standards are unified.
Well, this week in the EU, Parliament and the Commission reached an agreement on the CBAM, the Carbon Adjustment Border Mechanism, just to impose like a carbon tax to all the countries with we are making business. At the same time, I was taking this example in the previous panel, but the American SEC released a new rule to ask companies to realize new carbon and climate environment disclosures. We see that things are moving really fast. A green economy is honestly growing, and we see that in all the Western countries. But do you think in the coming years, the next 20 years, for instance, we will see a part of the world making this green economy a reality, and another part of the world remaining in the brown economy?
No, they wouldn't. It's very important that the developed world, which has all the money and all the responsibility as well, because frankly, why we do have all this money? Because we are industrial nations. We have all the responsibility to develop the green technologies. But if we start massively using our green technologies, it will be exactly like with digital technologies. The prices will shoot downwards. And if the prices will shoot below the brown technologies, which they will, because brown technologies will not be eventually worked at anymore, and they wouldn't get more efficient, then the rest of the world actually will also benefit from these inventions, but at a later stage. This transfer of knowledge and technology shouldn't take long. We have our support programs for developing world. We can actually help them very quickly. For example, I'm very often wondering, why are we talking but not doing? I mean, many people in the developing world live in within the electricity grids where there is no guarantee of supply 24/7, 365, and they are diesel run. I mean, this is a perfect environment to switch from diesel to solar and batteries. It will probably, for them, even mean more security of supply, certainly not less. These systems do not cost that much, they're easily available, but for some reason we are not supplying, I mean, from our support funds massively to kind of at least reap these very, very low-hanging fruits. I think if we could start, I mean, more doing this, you shouldn't despair that the rest of the world is not coming with us, because it's healthier, it's better, I mean, cleaner, doesn't smell bad, and it will be cheaper. But it is our responsibility to make space for these technologies and then make the prices go down. And indeed, the border levy on CO2 is extremely important. Because so far, let's look at what's going on now, not anymore, because, I mean, there are other reasons. But, I mean, through Finland came every year thousands of terawatt hours of electricity, which was not produced in any way in green way. Okay, some of it was nuclear, you could argue it didn't emit CO2. But, I mean, it came on this market, which means that the prices never had the space to make green development, green investment. Now this has changed. So actually we should have had the border levy 10 years ago.
So, well, do you think as Europeans our responsibility in a way is to finance, to start the investments on electrification of Africa, for instance?
What I'm saying is, for Europeans, the responsibility is to develop new green technologies so that they become cheaper and cheaper and people in Africa can start buying them as well. But indeed, some technologies are already cheaper than the old ones which they are using. They are also actually more useful and guarantee better security of supply. We run huge investment projects in Africa, and these small kind of off-grid electricity systems, they are stackable, they are easy to use, they are easy to develop, they are easy to give over. It doesn't take tens of years. So I think indeed we should actually rethink a little bit what we are doing with our projects in Africa. It shouldn't be anymore what we used to call elegantly in Europe grand projet. Nowadays, these new technologies, they are stackable. I mean, even you don't need, for example, even water sewage plants, I mean, which would treat, let's say, the water of whole Nairobi in one plant. You can use little systems Estonian company Space Trip is making, and you stack them, tens of thousands. And they will not ruin the system because they are digitally handled and managed. So you can actually, I mean, without investing upfront hundreds of millions, you can change already the life of maybe 10,000 families today, 10,000 families tomorrow. So this being dispersed, not anymore linked to any big installments, we need just to get our thinking different. And if we are ready to buy small stuff and give it to simple people, rather than build only bridges and roads from European money, I think it could work actually very well.
Well, so we can see some legendary tech entrepreneurs like Bill Gates taking this over and coming to Africa or to Europe with new solutions in nuclear power, for instance. Do you think this is the right way to solve the problem, that those big tech entrepreneurs are leading this way, or the states or public service should do it?
No. Our thinking is very clear. And I think this is proven by how technology in free world is developed. It's not like 20th century that if somebody developed a nuclear bomb, it was definitely a government. Nowadays, new technology happens in free world, in private sector. And there are many different ways. I mentioned Space Trip for water purification. There is Timber, which makes actually cutting wood and keeping track that nobody's stealing anything far more efficient and effective. There are so many green startups. I mean, let's mention Global.Earth, which is trying to use Web3 technology and tokens in order to make sure that forest does not get cut at all. I don't know whether they are therefore in competition with Timber or not, because Timber is a monitoring mechanism. I think they can monitor also growing wood, and so on, so on. So if government tries to think that they have like ideas which then private sector needs to implement, I think this is so 19th century that I cannot even start thinking about it, why should be more efficient. Let the 1,000, good ideas fly and make sure that your governmental policy is not discriminatory, because every nation, for reasons I never have understood, runs systems like entrepreneurial support and giving money to companies from public sector. I've never understood why they do it, and of course we cannot compete with big one, which is an additional disadvantage for small ones. Nobody should do it anyway, but if we are doing, we should make sure that we do not discriminate one technology against the other. Because then, it might be better technology which gets pushed out of the future development because we are discriminating for some reason. So that's why it's very important to be, even if you run support programs, you can do it this way. Let's say, I want to buy green energy, and I will, therefore organize a competition. You may provide it to me using hydrogen technologies, solar technologies, wind technologies, or maybe even nuclear technologies. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe as just 1 minute left, as a conclusion, on the last decades, we've seen that the major success stories in the tech industries, Amazon, Facebook, so on, Microsoft, Google, were all coming from the US, or today in the last 5 years from China, maybe. Do you think that Europe has the ability to build a new worldwide champion in tech and related to sustainability aspects?
One more aspect. While everybody is talking, Europeans should do more and Europe should have more, Estonia has 10 unicorns per 1 million people. Repeat, 10 unicorns per 1 million people. So the rest of you, just get the government the hell out of the private market and you will get where Estonia is today in no more than 10 years.
Come on. Well, thank you so much. That was a pleasure to have this discussion with you, Mr. President. So I thank you all. Maybe you can give a big applause to Ms. Kaljulaid. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.